Hey guys! Alright, you guys ready for some Greece? Let's go! Alright, so, after the River Valley era, a number of classical civilizations developed in the Mediterranean and in Asia. So after you had those River Valley civilizations, you're going to start developing your civilizations a little bit more into these classical civilizations that are going to be a lot more organized. So these classical cultures created high levels of achievement in art, science, and technology that would really impact future ages all the way up to the present day. So the first major classical civilization we're going to talk about was ancient Greece. So Greece's lack of natural resources and location on the Mediterranean encouraged Greek trade with neighboring societies. So unlike those River Valley civilizations which tended to stay by themselves, Greece is going to really try to spread out to neighboring areas, and it's going to really expand what is considered a civilization as far as territory goes. So the mountains in Greece covered about 75% of the area and divided the people and made unifying people really impossible because, again, you've got geographical barriers. People aren't going to want to cross over a mountain to visit someone. It's way too much. So the Greeks developed these independent city-states, which are called polis. So make sure you guys remember this term. And these city-states are going to be in each valley and its surrounding mountains. And the reason it's going to be in these valleys, again, easier for you to farm, easier for you to grow crops and herd cattle. So when we talk about the Greek culture, despite a lot of their lack of unity, because again of these geographical borders, the Greeks are going to share a lot of really common characteristics. For instance, they all have that same language, they're all going to speak Greek and write in Greek. The writing is going to be influenced by that Phoenician alphabet, and it's going to become the basis for Latin. If you guys remember Phoenician, we talked a lot about that earlier when we were talking about Mesopotamia. Go back to that video if you guys need a refresher on that. So the Greeks were polytheistic, and they believed that gods were immortal but had human qualities, and religion became the basis for Greek mythology, which I personally love Greek mythology. If you guys have ever heard of the Percy Jackson and the Olympian series, that is one of my all-time favorite books. I highly recommend it. There is a movie out about it, but it's trash. Don't watch it. There's a Lady Gaga song in it. It has nothing to do with world history. Don't recommend. So in Greece, most of these Greek city-states, or polis, had an agora, which was a center for trade and government. And so this agora is going to be this place where a lot of commerce, a lot of trading is going to go on. Within these city-states, they also had an acropolis, which is a temple on a hill dedicated to a sacred god. So people might go there to worship the god Zeus, which was the god of the sky, or Poseidon, their god of the sea, Athena, the god of wisdom. And you guys can look all of these up. There's some really interesting stories in Greek mythology. You guys are going to be reading a lot about this stuff when you get to language arts this year. So definitely keep this stuff in mind. So some of the differences among these different city-states, despite having a really similar language in that same Greek mythology, these polises were pretty different from each other, especially in how they were governed. And again, it's pretty easy to have that difference when you've got these geographical barriers keeping them separated. Some of these polises had a monarchy, for instance. And when we're talking about these differences, I want you guys to write down the different types of governments. Because while this is pretty interesting for Greeks, knowing these different types of governments is really important in seeing how modern day governments run their countries. So the first one's a monarchy. Monarchy would be like in England. It's a government ruled by a king or a queen. The rule of that is hereditary. Some of these rulers are going to claim divine right of kings, which is a major term we're going to be talking about next semester. Some of them also had this thing called an aristocracy, which is a government ruled by elite nobles, or it could be a ring of people. So the state is ruled at that place by nobility. It's hereditary, just like with a monarchy, but this one's based on family ties, your social rank, or your wealth. So people could be put into power just from having a lot of money and marrying into a family without necessarily being in that divine right of kings like we saw with the monarchy. Then they had polises like Sparta, which Sparta we're about to talk about a lot, which is it's a very notable city-state. They had an oligarchy, which is a government ruled by a small group of citizens. And this rule is based on wealth or ability. So this one, you don't have to be hereditary. you could just be really wealthy and easy to talk to people, and you gain that power without having anything to do with being married into a family. This ruling group is going to control the military, and it's going to have a bit more power as far as anyone can be in it. It's not like it's just, oh, you were born into this family, or you have that divine right of kings to rule. Then there's polises like Athens, which is another huge city-state. If anything, when you guys are thinking about city-states, I want you guys to think about Athens and Sparta. These two are going to have a lot of things going on with each other. Athens had this thing called a direct democracy. It's when a government ruled by citizens who can vote on decisions. So direct democracy states is ruled by its citizens, and rule is based on citizenship. And majority rule is going to decide your vote. So it'd be like having the U.S. government without the Electoral College, and everything is just voted by popular vote. So one thing I want to note with this, democracy was a major idea that came out of Greece. Democracy was created from this, and from this is how we got our democracy in the United States. Just with people in power voting for us, we have a representative democracy. So there's other people like the Electoral College who vote for us, rather than having everything be just by popular vote of the citizens. Athenian society in Athens, again, this major city-state we're trying to talk about, focused on wealth and culture. And these architects would build giant things like the Parthenon, which honored the goddess Athena, who's the goddess of wisdom. So again, major theme in Greece, building these giant things, trying to support the gods. So much of the culture was wrapped in worshiping gods. Athenian society also was really big into sculptures and theaters. So you had artists who created realistic sculptures to look like these actual Greek mythology characters that they worshipped. They also had a lot of theaters which had comedies and tragedies, and this is where you start to have the rise of theater. Another thing that they had was philosophers. Now that people are having these civilizations, rather than worrying about hunter-gathering or building your crops, people can actually start to think about things. So you had these major philosophers, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, who would question the assumptions and the use of logic, trying to find answers to questions. So they were always thinking about, how did the world work? What are some things that we can do about our society? What's right and wrong? And just thinking about the idea of thought. So we're going to be talking a lot about them as well. So those two Greek city-states I've been talking about, Athena and Spartan, they represented really big differences among the different polises. So Spartan society focused more on military strength and not really freedom and learning and thought like we had in Athens with Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. So the Spartan men served in the military until they were around 60 years old, and boys began military training around age 7. So you guys are all what, like 15, 16, somewhere in there? Well, if you guys lived in ancient days Sparta, you'd be off to war. Whereas the women ran family estates and men trained or fought. So this is a good example of Spartans showing their strength during the Persian Wars. And Persian Wars are something we're really going to focus on later on in this class. So they were more about battles, not as much of the intellectual thing. So we're going to go back and talk a little bit more about Greece in the next video, but hope you guys enjoyed this one. See you next time.